I was very taken with The Taming of the Shrew. I had seen The Taming of the Shrew. My ex-wife was in a production of it in college, and then I had seen a production of it in Central Park with Raul Julia and Meryl Streep, and just thought, man, this thing's great. And there's this amazing sexual tension. There's this very sort of woman with an extraordinarily high opinion of herself, and this guy who is sort of rough around the edges. And I thought, it just amused me. And I thought, if I got to do this detective crap, maybe I can take that and put it in a television show. And I was so uninterested in the detective thing. I mean, so completely uninterested in the detective thing. But also convinced that, and this is something that people don't believe, because I think Moonlighting gives the appearance of anarchy when you see it, but it wasn't. I had, when I was in college, the one semester that I spent at Hofstra, I had a wonderful teacher named Walter James Miller, who was a writer. And I remember one day he said to us, he said, do you like the Marx Brothers movies? Do you like Duck Soup? Do you like Night at the Opera? And I said, oh, very much. And he said, they look like anarchy, don't they? And I said, sure do. And he said, they were written by, and I want to say it was, I'm going to make a fool of myself, I think it was George Kaufman wrote a lot of them. He said, and they have superb classic three-act structure, the Greek unities, three-act structure, the whole thing, and proceeded to show us that. So when we would do an episode of Moonlighting, we would actually sit down, figure out the crime, figure out the mystery, work it out in great detail, make sure there were no loopholes in it, and then we'd throw it away. And because I discovered that you couldn't really do the comedy. The comedy needed this, you needed to feel the world was ending, that something was truly at stake. If you look at Ghostbusters, which is a very funny movie that around the same period, the premise of Ghostbusters is the world's about to come to an end. Hell is about to engulf the planet, and you need that. The great comedies actually have a very strong sense of that. You know, if you look at Some Like It Hot, you know, it's the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and we're going to be killed by these mobsters. I mean, so we would approach every episode with that same idea. You couldn't just do jokes. And the other thing that was very important to me was you always needed to feel the ache, that there were these two people who it was clear to everyone else probably belonged together, but were completely incapable of sort of recognizing that in themselves. And that gave the show a kind of an ache, gave it a kind of soul. And I did it mainly, at least initially, mainly to amuse myself, and also they wanted this, I really felt like, okay, I'm fulfilling an obligation. They wanted a detective show. Here's my detective show. And I remember we were filming the pilot, and there's a scene where Sybil Shepherd comes to meet Bruce Willis. She's a model, and she made a lot of money, and her accountant had her invest in all these losing businesses so that she could claim tax write-offs. And one day she wakes up and her accountant's gone, and she has no money, and she has only these losing businesses. So she goes around closing them up. It's a nail salon and a pet grooming thing and a this and a that and a detective agency. And she goes to this rather lavish detective agency in Century City, California, determined to close it up. And we cut ahead, and there's Bruce Willis, who we've never seen before. He's got like this wiffle basketball. He's got a wastebasket, and he's taken the door to his office and opened it slightly, so the wastebasket sits on top of that. And Elise Beasley brings in Sybil Shepherd to meet Bruce Willis, opens the door, and as she opens the door, the basket falls on her head. And without missing a beat, she goes, and Bruce Willis walks over and goes, "Hi, Mr. Pesto, looking a little pale today." I mean, and this is all going on. And Bob Butler, great director, Hill Street Blues, and, you know, all these other things, turns and looks at me and goes, "You're not serious." And I said, no, absolutely, that's what it's supposed to be. And the network called and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "What do you mean you can't do that?" And they said, "Well, it's a detective show. If you make jokes, there's no jeopardy." I said, "What do you mean, jeopardy?" He said, "Well, we won't worry that, you know, is Bruce Willis going to be killed this week, or Sybil Shepherd?" I said, "Well, everyone knows they're not going to be killed. It's a television show." And, I mean, we had these conversations, and I remember that they sort of reached the penultimate thing. I want to say it was the 5th episode, and we weren't on television yet. I wrote this thing where they approach In the second episode, actually, I remember I wrote this thing. They were outside some house and they had to get inside the house. And back then, invariably, the detective would grab a bobby pin or something and he'd jimmy the lock and go. I just thought this is the stupidest goddamn. I had no. So I wrote this thing for Bruce where he grabs the bobby pin out of Sybil Shepherd's hair and she goes, "What are you doing?" He says, "Watch." And he takes the bobby pin and he shoves it in the lock. He goes, "You stick the bobby pin in, you pull the bobby pin out, you stick the bobby pin in, and you shake it up." And he does this thing. And they said, "You can't do that. No one will take him seriously." I said, "You're not supposed to. It's okay." Then we got to the fifth episode, which was the last episode in the order. It was a 2-hour pilot in these 5 episodes. And they want to get into, there's some big something going on in some ballroom somewhere, and they want to get in, and there's like a CIA guy outside with an earpiece, dressed in a tuxedo. And Bruce Willis comes rushing up, and he says, "I got to get inside. I got to find a man with a mole on his nose." And the guy answers, he says, "Mole on his nose?" And Bruce goes, "A mole on his nose." And the man says, "A mole on his nose. Who do you suppose has a mole?" And they start talking in rhyme, this whole Dr. Seuss thing. And it goes on for about a minute and a half. And I still remember, I guess it was Ann Daniel called me. And she said, "You cannot do that. You're going to kill this thing." And I said, "But this is what this thing is." And what was fascinating, so we made the shows, now they put them on television, and Howard Rosenberg was the lead critic of the LA Times at that point. And I still remember the column. It said, the headline was "Beauty and the Beast." Because his perception was the same as ABC's, which is, who is this ugly guy, this rough, and what is this stupid show? And then I think 2 weeks later, he wrote another column. He went, "Okay, I didn't get it. Now I get it." And that was enormously satisfying to me. But the show wasn't a hit immediately. It really, people didn't really, they did have like a problem with it. I remember my grandfather was still alive. My dad's dad was in his 90s, and he called me. I said, "Did you see it?" And he went, "It's too fast. I can't understand what they're saying. It's too fast." And I had that conversation with Bob Butler throughout the show. He'd do a take, and he'd look at me, and I'd go, "Faster." And he'd say, "Faster?" He said, "Glenn, I'd say, I mean, I really believed with all my heart that it just needed to be like greased lightning. The line I always used to use when I said, "The writing's not very good. If we do it fast, we'll get away with it." But it really caught on that summer. It was on, and then over the summer, people caught it again. And then it sort of became this thing you couldn't contain.